G'day, Alex. I am thrilled to be chatting with you today, mate. Welcome to Good Movie Monday.
Thank you very much. Nice to be here.
Now, look, we're on this week's show. We're talking about movies, featuring rock bands, and it's been 20 years since the release of Garage Days. Let's chat about that for a moment. Like, after all these years, it still feels like a really personal film. Was that a personal film for you?
Yeah, well, I've made a few films about rock bands. The Crow had a rock band in it as well, and look, music is a really important thing in films, I think. So I always try and find a lot of filmmakers try and find writers to be their protagonists. I've never been able to work out why. A lot of the time, it's based on stories that are written by a writer, obviously. So they use the same protagonist. But I figure, I don't want to make films about filmmakers. Filmmakers are kind of dull. Rock stars are far more interesting. I've worked with a few real ones too over the years, having made music videos. And yeah, so I always try and put a musician in there somewhere, and Rockstar often wins the battle. Garage Days is loosely based on my own past. I was never a rock star. I wasn't even a failed rock star. I lasted behind a microphone and a synthesizer for all of a few months. I got together with a bunch of people because that's the sort of thing you did in those days. We're talking like very early 80s now. Everyone wanted to be in a band. So I was already a filmmaker. So we started mucking around and wrote some songs and played a couple of gigs as well. And we were absolutely woeful. And so I ended up throwing that career away. But it was the inspiration for Garage Days in many ways,
I was going to say, please tell me you weren't the manager turned roadie in real life.
No.
So coming off the back of The Crow and Dark City, I think it was from my point of view, a pretty ballsy move to make a small comedy about a Sydney garage band trying to coexist, amongst the rise of pokie machines. Was there resistance from people when you tried to, initiate it?
No, not really. It came out as partly out of necessity because I had to do a lower budget film. Dark City didn't do very well, and The Crow had done incredibly well, of course. Dark City didn't do well at the box office initially. It's done well over the years, but at the time, I had to, come up with a lower budget film. So Garage Days sort of fitted that niche. There was some resistance. There was some lack of acceptance of the film when it was done, though, when it was made, because it was a light, happy film, essentially. I mean, there's a few dark elements in there, I suppose, but it's fun. It's a comedy, romantic comedy, for God's sake, And a lot of people had already thought I was the dark gothic guy, and so they were less willing to accept that on its own terms, I think if someone else had made the film, it may have done better, but I think people went in expecting a deep and meaningful sort of expose of the rock world or something, and when they got this kind of frothy comedy, they didn't know what to make of it,
How did you go though, in terms of it being a very uniquely Australian, particularly Sydney kind of film? Do you think it ever stood a chance, with the international audience?
I think it did. I mean, it was kind of weird because it was financed by Fox Searchlight out of the States. They were after me for a lot of projects, and I ended up doing iRobot was my next film with Fox. I was developing a lot of stuff with them at the time. So they wanted to encourage me, and they just, they flicked me a few mil, which wasn't much for them at all, to make Garage Days, it's kind of odd the way it got made. It came together very, very simply. They didn't need stars in the film. I mean, none of the actors meant anything outside of Australia. Kit Gurry and Pia Miranda had been successful in Ali Brandy, but stars don't drive Aussie movies, and no one knew who they were overseas. So it came together in a really unusual fashion. And then I tried to explain to the studio that they really should release the film in the US first. Sundance took an interest in it and wanted to premiere it there, which was great, and it would have been a great sort of kickoff for the film. But the studio insisted on releasing it here in Australia first. And I was trying to explain to them that because it's me doing a lower budget movie and I already had a pretty big profile in Australia, it was going to get kind of mauled by people because there's a bit of a tall poppy syndrome that to this goes on to this day. And sure enough, it's exactly what happened. You know, Australian movies were received so much better in those days if they'd had some level of success overseas. So I wanted to give it that chance to kind of justify its potential success in Australia, because that's kind of the way the media were in Australia then. I think to a certain extent, they still are. You know, we ignore our local talents and our local filmmakers and local films here until some schmuck overseas says they're okay, you know. So the studio didn't understand that mentality because they weren't Australian, even though they were owned by a pretty famous Australian at the time. It didn't really filter down to the lower echelons of the studio, and so they insisted to release it in Australia first. And I think that really hurt the project, hurt the film, quite frankly.
Yeah, for sure. It's interesting that you say that whole tall poppy syndrome thing, because I feel like Aussie films quite often, more often than not, import, you know, American or British talent, like fairly high profilers, and then when they star in these films, then they get savaged for taking the jobs of Australians. You can never win. There's never really a balance. It's just an odd thing that our industry does.
And of course, we have to do that now because it's you know, that's the way films get financed. They have to be anointed by a name.
Yeah. Well, I hope this question doesn't come off, you know, insulting, because it's not intended that way. But I'm wondering, have you ever considered Garage Days for like a stage show? Because it seems to me the perfect fit for one.
No, it's not insulting at all. No, I've never really considered it. Weirdly, my first feature, Spirits of the Air, almost had a moment where we were going to turn it into a stage show, and it was going to be. I wouldn't have called it a musical, but there were going to be some songs in there, some bits of music in there. But no, Garage Days I've never really considered it. I mean, you sort of need the success behind it to really justify that. You know, weirdly, stage shows can. You know, they can make, if they do well, they can make much more money than films could ever make. But they sort of have to come from some initial success if they're going to come from a film, you know. But you know, it's an idea. Maybe I should consider it, you know.
I think it would be a good one. Look, I want to now skip forward 20 years, like as if we can just do that. But if I can just maybe stop at 2009 just for one moment, because I want to thank you for making Knowing, because that's a film that I return to so regularly. I love it. It's a fantastic movie. So
thanks for saying so.
Yes, but of course, right now you're doing something completely radical and exciting. Can you tell our followers what Vidiverse is and explain sort of how it works?
Yeah, well, look, you know, this has come out of my own frustrations with getting films to an audience. You know, it's becoming harder and harder to make original content unless it's a franchise or a sequel or a remake or whatever, and it's really hard to get them into the theaters. So I thought, you know, streaming is the answer in many ways for independent filmmakers like me and many others, of course. So we've started up this, and, you know, Netflix was the sort of great promise, had great promise when it first started, but more and more it's becoming very commercialized, and it's not really supporting the kind of, you know, cutting edge, cool, original content that they were first doing when they first started. You know, the danger of becoming probably more overly successful in many ways, you know. So I thought there's a place for something unique and new. And so we've started this project called Vidiverse. It's a streaming platform. And initially it's to showcase really cool, independently produced, often on the smell of an oily rag, short films from around the world, stuff that basically is submitted to us. I watch everything. I've watched hundreds of short films in the last few months, and I've selected the cream of the crop. So far, the platform has, I think, around 70 short films. One of them is my own film, which we're calling our first Vidiverse original, just because you can't see it anywhere else. It's a 20-minute film called Mask of the Evil Apparition. which is getting a very good reception. It got great response around the festival circuit, and now it's getting great responses from the platform, from Vidiverse. And, you know, look, touch wood, it seems to be going really well. We've had an amazing response to it. And I think it's because it's kind of a unique idea, and it's stuff that I put my guarantee stamp of approval on there, saying this is not a bunch of random shorts. It's stuff that I think is really cool and often made to an incredibly high standard. You know, I'm actually kind of envious of a lot of the work that's on the platform. I don't know how these filmmakers have managed to achieve the level of production value that they have, often, as I say, for very little to no budget. And, you know, it's a fabulous thing to see. So I'm trying to encourage people to subscribe, or at the very least, watch some of the films that are on there, and support indie filmmaking. You know?
Yeah, I completely endorse it, because like I've got a subscription, and I've watched your film, which I wanted to quickly talk about, because fans of Dark City will be thrilled to know that you go back into that kind of universe, I guess you could say. Do you have more stories from Dark City to be told?
Yeah, I do. Look, weirdly enough, this is not really related to Vidiverse at the moment, but I'm actually developing a TV series of Dark City right now. It's one of the projects that we're working on. So we're not greenlit yet, but it is in the early stages of development right now. So, you know, touch wood, hopefully that will come to the fore. You know, look, I'm embracing my dark side, let's say. I mean, it's a stuff that I can't easily tell, particularly in this current climate of filmmaking. You know, Dark City is something that can hopefully be made because it's based on an existing thing, an existing IP, you know. So it's not like I don't think if I was coming up with Dark City today, I'd ever be able to get the thing made. But this has some veracity to it, based on the fact that the studio who would be making the series have had some financial gain, and they can see that there is a market for more Dark City, you know. But for me to be able to continue to do the cool original stuff, and I get excited about doing stuff that's completely fresh, you know, and also has maybe a dark edge to it. It's really, really hard right now. So Vidiverse is one of the multi-pronged approaches that I have to being able to completely independently make films that I have utter control of, you know. I mean, Francis Ford Coppola, for God's sake, has just announced he's going to spend $120 million of his own money to make a film that he's been trying to get financed for years and no one's wanted to make. And this is Francis Coppola, you know. I mean, for God's sake, none of us have a hope in hell, you know. So I'm trying to do my humble, much less expensive version of that at the moment.
Well, look, I'm really excited for it, to be honest with you. Not just blowing smoke up your ass. Like I did grab a subscription, and scrolling through the films you've got up there already are really exciting, and I'm just looking forward to actually diving into a lot of them. And look, this barely does it any justice because we're just about out of time, and I do have to wrap it up. But yeah, very, very cool platform, and I encourage everyone to get along. And you've really excited me with this news of a potential TV series as well.
Great, fantastic. Well, lovely talking to you. Thanks very much.
Is that you, Dodge? Simon. Wow.
Get away from me! No separation or anything permanent or anything like that.
Well, we obviously do not understand each other.
No. Yeah, man, I got nothing to lose. Let's do it.
Get back! looking at me like that?
Snow!